We turn to stories for a lot of different reasons, to see the world through someone else's eyes, to discover beauty in unexpected places, and sometimes just to be terrified.
That primal fear is the fear of the unknown.
This notion of what it is to live in a small town where everyone knows each other, and that was what instantly kind of connected me beyond the monsters.
The DNA of the series is very much like the bookshelf of Stephen King novels.
He's all about building these people that you can relate to. What if my child died and then came back? What if the dog in the house suddenly went wrong? What if my husband was a nightmare?
The scripts, they're so dark, they're so mysterious, they're so true in essence to what Stephen King is.
You have no idea what's happening here, do you?
My primal experience of reading Stephen King is the experience of being a little kid, petrified with a full bladder, afraid to leave a tent in the middle of the night.
The clown in it is fundamentally the fear of those children, of everything lurking inside of their closets, the sort of essential fears of childhood. In almost every of Stephen King's great stories, there is something essentially human at the heart of it.
The beautiful thing about Castle Rock, the series, is it lets us take this world that he's created and tell a brand new story, but not limiting ourselves to any one aspect.
I can hear what you're thinking and feeling.
In order to really feel afraid for someone, you have to connect with them.
It's sort of the genre that he invented, which is character horror.
This should feel like something that could happen to an average town, an average person.
Nothing stays dead in this town.
That everybody who's in the town of Castle Rock should feel like they're just one step away from who we are and where we are.
The plot was revealed through character. The character that I was offered to play was really, I thought, complex and interesting.
It's, here's the awful thing, here are the people he's doing them to that you love by this point, and let's show you how that impact resonates. Like, half the time it's in the title of the book. It's Cujo, it's Christine, it's it. It's Firestarter. It's not a mystery with Stephen King.
He chose these amazing stories, and then he invested each of his characters with the same level of Dickensian detail and love that any great literary writer would.
The murder capital of 1991. Can you believe that?
Gordon has always been interested in the macabre.
Well, one thing that I think is fascinating about the way that King writes a chapter, or sometimes an entire novel, in terms of structure, is that he'll actually tell you the terrible thing that is going to happen right at the beginning of the chapter. And you spend the rest of the chapter or the book trying to anticipate that moment, waiting for that moment that you know is coming, and building dread, even as the characters are going through their own lives and have no idea what's coming, you do. And so I think there's a real technique of a forward suspense that he gives you right from the beginning.
It's all about turning those screws and increasing the tonnage of story and of weight and of fear to the point where it feels like it's going to break. And then he does it some more.
One prong was to try to deconstruct and reverse engineer a Stephen King story. So we spent a lot of time talking about what keeps us up at night. What the primal experience is of fear, of confronting the unknown, what it feels like, what our experience of New England looks like.
There is a lot of history in this town. Not all of it good.
Castle Rock as a place is somewhere that obviously looms large in the King universe.
biblical terrors and nightmares and disasters and tragedies.
As the blaze continues to engulf more and more acres of forest,
Who is hung around in a town like Castle Rock? Who stays and why, and what does life feel like in that town?
Who doesn't want to be at a lake? Who doesn't want to be in the woods? It's no accident that a thing of beauty, a piano, has fallen through the roof. Knowing that a place that is serene and tranquil and lovely and attractive can, by just a few turns of the screw, be somewhere that is horrifying. I think that kind of hopefully sets the hook for us all.
Part of what we wanted to do with this first season of Castle Rock was to look at nostalgia as something that is both a very powerful force for good and for evil.
Memory and forgetting is a really important thematic strand in this season of storytelling on this show.
You knew my father? Much of Henry's quest is trying to piece together the pockets of his own life that have eluded him over time. We also see that reflected in Ruth's story, where Ruth will, tell herself a narrative to get herself through.
And I think that was sort of something that we were really interested in exploring in this form of nostalgia, and it's why we chose not to set the show in, say, 1985, when some of the great Castle Rock novels were being written, when you had this sort of more white picket fence Castle Rock, but instead to look at a Castle Rock that was boarded up, to look at a Castle Rock where the younger population had basically fled. That was something that was interesting to us, to kind of think about a place that was a little bit stuck in its own past, and the underbelly of that nostalgia.
Bad shit happens here because bad people know they're safe here.
We wanted to show the importance of the church and the importance of people's faith. We have two characters in Warden Lacey and Matthew Deaver whose faith is extremely important to the sort of central architecture of the story. And yet you also have a bunch of characters who have, I think, pushed away some of that faith, who have lost faith.
There are different kinds of scary stories, but the ones that always haunted me are the stories that involve characters just scratching away at the kind of, at the edges and the kind of borders of their own comprehension.
I fear what's to come, Ellen, but I also know Castle Rock still has a defender, even in the dead of night.
Not having a kind of monolithic point of view about whether this town was cursed, about why it might be cursed if it is. Watching all of those kinds of people coexist makes Castle Rock feel more like the world we actually exist in than like a world in a story.
You make a fist and bump it against mine.
You see people's natural fears and worst inclinations coming out when they come in proximity with Bill Skarsgård's character. Is he the one causing that? Is it the town? Is it a sound in the woods? What is it that is leading people to their worst moments?
There's a sort of sense of irresolution, and even if the monster has been slain, some of the kind of human and everyday horrors remain, or a sense that the universe is a scarier place than we thought it was when we embarked on the journey.
I don't know what came over me. I'm not a murderer. I don't.
It never happened.
prison is one of those kind of great settings that he's been preoccupied with for decades as a novelist and as a story writer.
Anytime you can take one character and put on them the weight of an institution, so that you're not just talking about Shawshank Prison broadly, but you're saying, well, this character can represent these things, what solitary confinement does to a human being, inhumane practices can do to a human being. And so it allows us to take a character, one character, and focus specifically on that character, and instead of painting too broad a brush.
If he wasn't a psychopath before, he sure as shit is now.
Having a boogeyman versus having a bear or an alien, understand that's something to be scared of. But when something comes into our lives that looks like us, acts like us, and maybe even looks more innocent than we are, seems more childlike than we are, our defenses fall. That's the moment in which we are most vulnerable, when we say, well, how bad could this person be?
Henry, Matthew, Deaver.
We always loved the idea of this villain or victim that you couldn't quite get your head around, and Bill was the perfect piece of casting. It's that unknowability that is probably scariest.
When I met Sam and Dustin, the creators, and just sat down and talked to them and sort of picked their brains, I was like, wow, this show can be something special, I think.
So much of what Castle Rock is about is the sense of the threat is among us. It's almost, 50s level paranoia Red Scare.
It is not a supernatural force that arrives with a set of instructions like an IKEA crib. I think it's the fact that those malevolent forces can't fully be apprehended, that you can't quite put your arms around them and make sense of the rules, that makes that story and makes, in general, the library of Stephen King as indelibly terrifying as they are.
There is something wrong with that kid.
Front door, open.
"14 dead, another 5 missing. Maybe next time you'll think twice before you spring a lunatic from prison."
Maybe prison is what turned him into a lunatic.
We meet Andre Holland's character, Henry Deaver.
We wanted somebody who had suffered some of the tribulations of Castle Rock, but who had really managed to escape, with the exception of the ghosts that haunted him wherever he went.
Hey, killer.
He comes back and discovers quite quickly that people have not forgotten, the stories of him as a young boy.
Henry Deaver has a kind of a broken past. I think we all know people who sort of have a piece missing. This guy literally has a piece missing.
And I think part of what we have always loved about King too is the way that he takes archetypes and then sort of turns them on its head.
You can't be here.
I'm the lawyer.
And it's the perfect circle. It's, of course, Henry Deaver would end up, as a guy who gets death row prisoners off of death row, somebody putting somebody in solitary confinement for the rest of their lives. How does he square that circle of doing the wrong thing for what he believes is the right reason?
I'm your lawyer now.
There's just this connection that they have that goes beyond the physical and the explainable.
Stephen King loves to play with archetypes. He loves to play with these sort of age-old, millennia-old ideas of what heroism is and what purpose looks like. And so to have Henry Deaver as, much like Alan Pangborn, they were the flip sides of the same coin, and that coin being the law.
And when we meet Scott Glenn's Alan Pangborn in this season, you're really not quite sure about him.
Fucking ungrateful.
And I think in a weird way, he sort of has the opposite of Henry, where you meet him and you kind of dislike him at first, and then over the course of the season, you actually come to see that his intentions are good.
I've got to pick up Ruth at the hospital.
You take vampires, but then you spin a totally different kind of tale out of vampires. You take a haunted house, but then you spin a totally different kind of tale out of a haunted house. It's almost like he's challenging himself to take on these essential archetypes of storytelling. And I think that was part of what we wanted to try to do this season as well.
The dream of every writer is to create a character that they love and give them their worst ever day. Only through adversity do you find out who you actually are. And so much of the story is about identity.
It's you.
As we move along in the story, it's important with every episode to ratchet those things up.
Goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance.
So that each drop of the penny feels like things are more consequential, that we're taking you from one thing and exponentially escalating it.
Behold, I will tell you a mystery.
This town, they should pave over the whole damn county.
Stephen King is a real master at the sort of coy game of building a sense of tension where it's not entirely clear what is a portent of doom or disaster, and when the Plymouth Fury is not a demonic monster, it's just a Plymouth Fury, you know? And so we tried to kind of explore that ambiguity as well.
You know, I should just leave.
I think it better.
Supernatural in Stephen King and certainly in Castle Rock plays a very important function, and I think there's a sweet spot in which the characters and the audience, we're not quite sure whether the supernatural is existing. Does it exist just in the minds of these characters? That, I think, can be just as terrifying as anything, to not be sure in one's own mind what is real and what is not.
Certainly beautiful country.
When we brought the show to life, it was very important in establishing Castle Rock as a place that we brought some of that sensibility, that this was a place that was once great, that once was small town America, and it has slipped and slid downhill into decay and moral rot. You can see the origins. You can see that it once was a great small town.
It was interesting to approach the making of a show that at times, if you squint at it from the right direction, looks like a character drama, and at times looks like a kind of wild genre thriller. I hope that it combines both aspects, because Stephen King's novels certainly do.
Something terrible's gonna happen.
He presents you with a high concept, but he executes it in a low concept way.
But he's driven. You know, he still has stories to tell, and as a writer, to realize that even at that level, there is no getting to the bottom of that barrel. There is no emptying the tank. It's, you write because you have to write, and Stephen King has to write.
It feels 100% real. It's as funny as it is scary. It's as moving and as sweet as it is upsetting. That's the tightrope we're trying to walk.
Mom! People have always had questions about you. And you come waltzing back to town, and there's more questions than ever.
You did this.